Alright everyone, we have to talk about Hurricane Irma because if you thought Hurricane Harvey was bad, some of the various predictive tracking measurements being taken of Irma show that it might actually be worse, if you can possibly believe that. One way in which it could be worse is if it does decide to go past Florida, like clip it, and go into the Gulf of Mexico, and I think most of the tracks thankfully don't have it going in that direction. Some keep it out in the Atlantic, and you get some storm surge and some wind and rain along the whole East Coast, and then no significant damage. I think that's what everyone's hoping will happen. And then it sort of bends up around and goes and inundates maybe Iceland or the English countryside, and they can complain about how it's too dry that day. It's infamously wet there and humid constantly. But some of the tracks have it going into the Gulf of Mexico. If Hurricane Irma, which is already Category 3, I think tomorrow it's billed to hit Category 4. It's going to be a major storm. If it decides to clip Florida, go into the Gulf of Mexico, and bends up and hits, say, the Houston area, you've got a shit-hits-the-fan situation that's going to take months to recover from. The damage there is already substantial enough. Of course, Houston didn't get a lot of wind, so that aspect of the damage is less, but they got monumental amounts of flooding. Various infrastructure broke down. A lot of homes were, more or less, they're unlivable at this point. They're going to have to be scrubbed from top to bottom. A lot of them will have to be torn down because of the level of damage. And they could get this next storm. There's a possibility that it decides to jump across all of Florida and hammer that region. That would probably be the worst possible outcome. Thankfully, it's not particularly likely. But people in that region of Texas should keep that in mind and prepare for the vague possibility that they're about to get hammered by another rain-heavy storm that's going to bring back peak flooding. And I mean, the water still hasn't really drained off. The water levels are still abnormally high and will be for some time to come. It would you wouldn't need as much rain the second time around to basically destroy all of the non-hardened infrastructure in most of the Houston region. I mean, can you imagine? You've got a road that's it's being repaired, but it's destabilized because it's still waterlogged. And all of a sudden you get, another 1.5 feet, 2 feet of rain, a big problem. Another possibility is that it enters the Gulf but impacts around Louisiana. That might be a problem, as we learned from Katrina. If you have a levee break, then you have a catastrophe on your hands. That's all you need is some of the pumps to break down. We lost power and a levee broke. We're fucked, basically. It could also decide to stall out around Florida and impact them for a while. Could bend back up, slam into Tampa, or it could hit the Miami side, I suppose. Either way, Florida, though, is a little unique. If you've ever actually been to Florida, like I lived a few miles east of central Tampa for a while, and every day there's a major storm. Like, the amount of rain that you get there is insane, and lightning too. It's like I think the lightning capital of the U.S. is that area, which makes no sense because like later I get hit through a screen door by a bolt of lightning, and so now I tend to avoid storms. I don't like them so much as I used to maybe. And like I was living in Lightning City. It was every single fucking day. There isn't a day without rain there. There's also not a day without 95 degrees, full humidity, and extremely sunny. It's the most bipolar weather you could possibly imagine in the whole world. Like, you'd have to go to, like, what is it, Lake Maracaibo, I think it is, down in Venezuela, where they've got like a 200-day-a-year constant nonstop thunderstorm to find something more severe. Like the shores of Lake Victoria, and I think it's the western side, actually has even more lightning. It's like constantly a storm. But it could slam into that area. But thankfully, because it's flat and things tend to run off quickly into all of the water that exists, Florida's actually better equipped to handle hurricanes than most of the other places it could impact. It could also hit the Carolinas. It could hit the D.C. area. I think a lot of people are rooting for it to hit the D.C. area, honestly. It could use a good cleaning. Let's just say that. Some models have it hitting New York City. What the fuck do you think would happen if a storm that manages to get to Category 4 flies up the coast and smashes right into the Jersey/New York area? That, by the way, means we get another Hurricane Irene situation. It would be terrible for the state of Vermont. We're still technically recovering from Hurricane Irene all those years ago. So I think there was another storm a couple years after that dumped a bunch of rain here, if I can remember. But I don't think I was in the state at the time, so I wasn't really covering it. But I can remember Irene. It was drenching rain, high wind, a lot of trees down. It washed out bridges, it destroyed roads, it destroyed homes. It basically, if you went to, which I think it was Brandon, the little sort of miniature gorge that runs through actually the downtown flooded. And it carved out the underside of several homes. They, I believe, had to be scrapped. It damaged the sidewalks there. It gouged out a chunk of the road, and it's still being, I believe, repaired to this day. Years later, they're still repaired. There was no money to repair it. Like, they needed disaster relief. We got too little of it. I think Trump just freed up more money specifically for that purpose here. Probably a good thing, although if this new storm flies through at that strength level, because I think Irene wasn't that strong. It downgraded to a tropical depression, I believe, when it hit us. But I think it started out a lot weaker. It could be a category. We could actually get a hurricane coming through the state of Vermont. It could make it technically this far inland for the outer bands to begin impacting us while they're still much higher in wind. It'd be a disaster for this state. Because I'll tell you what, here's how it works. Florida, everything's flat. There's not a lot of variation there. So water just inundates everything and then trickles off. Here we have mountains and valleys. The mountains aren't going to hold that water because it runs downhill. You see, water is affected by gravity, as I'm sure that you know. That's why rain happens and things like that. See, the problem is it'll all come gushing out of those mountains into the valleys where most people live and flood everything to hell. You're talking about 10 feet of water rise in some areas. It would be a nightmare. The state would probably become impassable, yeah. Parts of the state have only one or two major ways to get from point A to point B. In those areas, if that road goes over a river that suddenly washes the bridge out, until that bridge is replaced, you ain't going jack shit nowhere. And that's what happens here. But yeah, let's hope it hits DC if it hits anything, because they could use, you know, good power washing. And they've got hot heads, it'll help cool them down. It would be very funny to see John McCain trying to swim in the flooded Potomac. No, don't worry, I've got this because, you know, I was in the military once. Then he gets in the water, he realizes he can't raise his arms above his head. Shit, throw me a life jacket, I need it. Give him one last thrill before his, you know, he's, I think, still got brain cancer, so he's not going to be around much longer. Give him a last thrill. Trump can go out and say, this fucking storm isn't huge enough, and my hands are bigger than this storm, and he'll, you know, crack jokes or something. By the way, Trump's response to Harvey, most people glowingly praised it. They were like, well, he immediately freed up funds. He seemed concerned, took a couple trips here, and seemed genuinely to care about the situation, which no shit he does. He does actually care about people. You do realize that a lot of his bombast is an act, right? You do realize that a lot of that's just a floor show, the strongman sort of WrestleMania stuff that he's used to doing for 20 fucking years. That's the truth about Trump. Yeah, he cares. He cares. Obama cared too. It's just he was inept. I honestly believe that. He's just fucking retarded. He didn't know what he was doing. But Trump may have to then oversee another major disaster, another major hurricane impact, depending on where it hits. But if it does hit DC, if it goes further inland, you got to realize there are a lot of mountain valleys there too. It's sort of like Vermont, actually. If you've seen it, it looks very similar. They'd have the same problem. Now, will this storm be more wind or more rain? I don't know. I don't know exactly which the case would be, but if it gets strong enough, you're going to have a lot of both to deal with. Whatever shoreline it gets near, that would have surge. And I think they were talking about storm surges at its current strength that would be monstrous. Like a real windbag of a storm on that level. If it hits New York City, yeah, it could actually, like, the subways would definitely flood. You wouldn't want to be trapped in there. You could have another New Jersey flooding scenario all over again. That would, by the way, that would get Christie rather mad. He would have to go out and start drinking all the water, because, you know, he's the size of the moon. He can absorb it all, so New Jersey might be safe. New York doesn't have that kind of individual as a mayor, has a communist mayor, so perhaps he would organize collective labor, just enslave people and have them bailing water back into the ocean or something. Sort of the way these people work. But yeah, don't expect much help from the municipal government of New York City if your city gets slammed. So they'll do what they always do, machine politics and all. But Irma could be worse than Harvey. And that's going some. Look at what fucking Harvey did. There were fire ants floating around stinging people. It's like the worst possible situation. Yeah. And then all of that refuse is swarming with fire ants too. They got to get rid of that. I don't know. I don't even know how you deal with such a situation short of burning it, honestly, in the streets or something. Well, there's too many ants. We can't do anything about this shit. We're going to have to get rid of it somehow. So, you know, this home's ruined. Pile it in the house and we'll just burn it to the ground. No fire hazard because everything's still soaked. That's about all. Peace out.